It'll record to the cloud.
Yeah, I don't know if it's that easy to send, that's all.
But otherwise, yeah, I'm recording it now, and somehow we will find out how to put it up.
Okay.
All right, welcome everyone. I'm not going to take up a lot of time. I am just going to ask Lily to open us with a prayer.
Lily?
This is Lily. She's from New South Wales.
Which Lily?
Not Lily. Lily Nalu.
No, Lily. Thanks, Cindy.
Okay, come on.
Okay. Okay. Can I say the prayer? No?
Yes, please.
Okay. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for all the many blessings that has blessed us with. We thank you for this time to meet together online as sisters to be able to learn a new skill to help us to become more self-reliant during these times. And we thank you for Cindy for organising it and us that the Spirit may be here, that we may be able to learn and to gain some more knowledge from it. And we say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. So I'll pass the time straight to Luke to introduce himself and get started with our meeting tonight. And thank you for coming on and helping us.
Sorry, thank you. I'm just going to share my screen, so bear with me for a second. Okay, can everyone see the screen?
Yep.
Yes.
Excellent. All right. So yeah, thank you, Cindy, for inviting me to come along and talk to you guys tonight. Just a little bit about me. So my name's Luke Williams. I'm actually a member of the Pakenham board. And as you can see from the pretty picture on your screen, I work for a company called Evergreen Garden Care. So a little bit of background for you. So my role with Evergreen is I'm the National Training and Facilitation Manager. So I actually train people on our products. So probably a pretty handy person to know when we're talking about garden. I've been with the company for about 7 years. And Evergreen's actually the biggest garden company in the world outside of the United States. So although you probably haven't heard of Evergreen Garden Care, you'll be pretty familiar with many of our brands, which you'll see in a minute. Basically, when you walk into a Bunnings store especially and pick up a garden product, it's likely to be one of ours. So I'm not going to take up a heap of time tonight, but Cindy's invited me to come and talk about the importance of potting mixes, which strangely enough I'm actually quite passionate about, as Cindy will attest to. So without further ado, we'll get through the presentation. There is a little video as well, so hopefully you all can hear it and whatnot. But just again a little bit about Evergreen. We have one vision at Evergreen, and that's to teach people and give them the products to grow your own green oasis. It's very, very simple. All the products that we make are designed for people that really have no experience in gardening. When I first started with Evergreen, I was horrible at gardening. Everything turned to black and to death, and thankfully with the products that I am able to use now, I have a lot of success. So these are some of the brands that you might be familiar with that we do. The one at the top in the middle there is probably our most well-known brand, Osmocote. So Osmocote's been around for about 40 years as a brand and is continuing to grow. It's about a $60 million brand for us, so a very big brand in garden. We do lawn builder, so obviously for lawn, fertilizing and whatnot. We have some Defender, which is our range of pesticides and herbicides. A brand new brand that you can see down there at the bottom right, Scott's Performance Naturals. Literally only been released last week, so you will see in the coming months some TV ads around Performance Naturals, and you're going to hear a lot about it. A very, very exciting brand. Our Every Drop brand down the bottom, which is our wetting agents. Obviously through the drier months, using wetting agents in your garden is very important. So we have a wetting agent brand. We also do herbicides. So Roundup, we have the retail division of Roundup. So that's a bit of an elephant in the room for us at the moment. There's a whole heap of media around Roundup, which hasn't been super positive. But in saying that, sales are still very, very strong. Debco. So Debco is a Victorian based potting mix company. You might be familiar with the Debco products. and then Osmocote Plus Organics. But our main sub-series brand is Scott's. So when we go to garden shows and things like that, we're marketed as Scott's, and that's how you'll generally see us. You won't hear us as Evergreen. So what are we talking about today? We're going to be talking about potting mix. And believe it or not, there's actually a whole heap of science in potting mix. I'm going to show you a little video first. The guy that you'll see in the video, his name's Adam Woodhams. He's a horticulturalist based up in Noosa in Queensland. And he does a lot of our educational videos. This video is actually a couple of years old, so some of the products that you'll see in this are outdated. I just want to give you the disclaimer, though, that this isn't a selling pitch for Scott's and for Evergreen and whatnot. This is a selling pitch for using quality potting mixes. So at the end of this, if you've learned anything, it's what not to buy. And if you purchase anything else, whether it be Scott's or something else, I'll be happy. So hopefully you can all hear this video. I've turned it right up, so you should be okay. Just goes for a few minutes. Bear with me. Okay.
Over the years, I've spent a fair bit of time working in garden centres, and there's one thing that used to always leave me baffled. Customers would happily spend $50 or more on a beautiful plant, sometimes hundreds of dollars on a pot, and then they'd say, oh, and can I just get a cheap bag of potting mix to stick it in? Well, there's an old saying, you get what you pay for, and that's never been truer than with potting mix. Potting mix isn't just a bag of dirt to whack your plants into. Quality potting mix is the result of extensive research, product development, and precise manufacturing. There's a reason the plants you buy from the nursery look so enticing. Right from the start, they've been grown and raised in professional quality potting mix. When you put a plant into a pot, you're putting it into a very unnatural position, so you need to try and provide, in a small space, everything that plant would get if it were in the ground. But just what does your new plant need? Well, good drainage with the right levels of moisture, good structure so that the roots can breathe, good support so that the roots can spread out easily, and the right balance of nutrients. I've grown many of my plants for years from seed or cutting, so I will not risk putting them into anything but a professional quality potting mix. To understand the difference between potting mixes, the best starting point is to know what's in them. First off, check out the bag. Only a premium or professional mix will carry the Australian standards red ticks. This means it will best sustain a potted plant and promote quality growth, flowering and fruiting. Professional mix will be made with natural materials from renewable resources such as wood chip or bark. This makes up the bulk of the mix. First, it's fully composted until it has a rich, dark, soil-like appearance and texture. Then it's blended with coarse washed sand or similar materials for drainage and structure. Finally, special components are added. Depending on the blend, this will include things like quality controlled release fertilizer, water crystals and wetting agents, and root biostimulants. All of those ingredients and composting and blending work give you a mix that's going to get your plants growing from day one. The mix will be weed-free, provide the perfect balance of moisture and drainage, and contain all the nutrients your plants need. It will also be really easy to re-wet if it dries out. That's the giveaway of cheap potting mixes. They're prone to shrinking and becoming water repellent. Cheap mixes tend to slump very quickly too because their main ingredients haven't been well blended or aged, so they're actually still composting. You'll also find that plants potted in a cheap mix will just sit there and do nothing, or worse, they'll go backwards, losing leaves and looking sick. Okay, so you have your plant and you have your professional potting mix. So here are a couple of tips on potting up. If the hole in your pot is smaller than a 5-cent piece, then you don't need to cover the drainage hole with gravel or filter material. Just add your potting mix. Bring the potting mix up to the right height for the plant's root ball to sit on, remembering that the plant needs to be at the same height in the new pot as it was in its old. And the top of the mix should be about 2 centimetres down from the lip of the pot. That way you'll be able to fill it up with water and it'll just soak in. Now position your plant and backfill around it with potting mix. Push it down gently to get rid of air pockets, but don't compress it. And then water well. For larger pots, you may want to do all of your potting and watering in place as they can get heavy and difficult to move around. I like to mulch my pots with decorative gravels too. This helps retain moisture and also adds a designer touch. Potting mix contains a lot of organic materials that will naturally break down. You do need to bear in mind that you'll need to repot your plants at least every couple of years, and with some faster growing species, you may need to do that sooner. It's also worth knowing that there are specialised professional mixes. These are designed for the needs of particular plant groups like natives, orchids, roses and gardenias, even bonsais and bulbs. If you're putting a plant into a
Selfish.
pot, it's because you want it to thrive, right?
It shouldn't be there.
So I ask you, why would you put it into anything but a professional quality
Don't have a
potting
whole
mix?
screen full. Anyway, I've done that.
You all hear that okay?
Click the cursor on leave. I would have
Yep.
stayed longer and got it going.
Okay. So
Hang on.
one of the biggest misconceptions about potting mix, I hear it all the time, is when people say, "I just go and buy a bag of dirt." Did anyone realise the potting mix isn't dirt? Does anyone know that? Quite often people don't, and what it actually is a breakdown of a whole heap of materials, but basically the bulk of a mix in potting mixes is actually pine bark. So the potting mix that you buy, at the store, generally nothing is dug out of the ground. It's actually all based from trees, so we get the byproduct of the logging industry, of the bark, and there's a whole process that this goes through. So the base mix of any of our potting mixes that we do is pine bark, and for this to get into to the situation that is ready to be bagged, it has to go through a whole process. So what we do is we lay it out on a big concrete slab, maybe 300 meters long. It's a very, very long line of pine bark, probably 5 or so meters high. And that actually just heats up. And what it does, you'll see it's steaming. It gets to about 60 degrees, and we'll go through with the tractor, we'll turn it all through, and we'll do that process for about 3 months. And what that actually does is it breaks the pine bark right down to that soil-like consistency that you see. It kills all the little weeds and pathogens in the mix. So technically, when you get a potting mix, you shouldn't have weed seeds or anything like that in it. And most importantly, it actually sets it at the right pH. So pH is a massive, massive factor of plant growth. If you have it too high or too low, you're going to have failure. What this does is it sets it at a pH between about 5.9 and 6.1, which is like perfect. So that is the base of all of our potting mixes. There is no dirt in potting mix. So if you've ever thought that, hopefully you've been educated. One of the cool things that we do as a company is we do all the garden shows around Australia. So you might have been to the Melbourne International Flower Garden Show. This particular picture here is actually from the Perth Garden Show last year. What we do is we get people to come in and sit down, and they make their own mini glass terrarium. So we teach them how to do a little homemade terrarium that they get to take home. But what that does for us is while they're there for 15 minutes making a terrarium, we get to talk to them about potting mix and the importance of good quality potting mix. Let's face it, if I said, hey, let's have a chat about potting mix to most people, they'd probably walk away. But when you're going to walk away with a free terrarium at the end, it's fantastic. And you see there, that's the little terrarium that they get. So this year alone, last year before the whole COVID thing happened, we did about 10,000 of these. So we're really trying to educate consumers and gardeners alike exactly what they should be looking for in a potting mix. So you saw before, Adam pointed out about the red ticks. Red tick premium is the Australian certified standards. Just a little bit of background. You can buy a potting mix in three ways. You can buy a potting mix that has absolutely no ticks at all, meaning black or red. So you can just go to the bag. There's no sign of Australian standards. What you're getting in that bag, and this is the same across any bag that doesn't have that tick and any brand, you're getting the green waste that you put out with your bin. So when you put all your green waste, your grass clippings, your cuttings and things out in your green lid bin, and the council comes and picks it up, that gets processed, it gets ground down, it gets sold back to potting mix companies, it composts for a month, and they bag it up and then sell it again. So anything that doesn't have a tick is effectively green waste. So much so that we had a bag, I should have caught the photo, I didn't think about it, but we had a bag in one of our Sydney reps last year saw a bag that had a whole string of Christmas lights in it. So you never know what you're going to get, in a bag that's got no ticks. But there's nothing in it but composted green waste. There's no fertilizer, there's nothing. And that's the stuff that when you sort of walk into a Bunnings store or a Mitre 10 or something, you're going to pay $3 for. That's what you're buying. Then you've got black tick. I'm going to put these up here. So black tick and red tick. So black tick, you can see there it says premium potting mix, red tick and black tick are produced to the same high quality standards, but they can be very different based on what's actually in them. So premium mixes, being a red tick, need to have enough fertilizer to last at least 1 month, compared to regular mixes that will require added fertilizers from the time of potting. So a black tick effectively means the composting pine bark is okay, but it may not have any fertilizer in it. You may need to add. It's just a very, very base product. So you'll often find on black tick product, if you turn it around and read the back of the bag, it'll say, now you need to add this, 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 and this. Or please go and buy this and mix it with your potty mix. So a black tick is only the bare minimum to attain an Australian standard. But the jump from a black tick to a red tick is ginormous. In terms of what needs to go into the bag and the science behind it is a very big difference. So you can see down the bottom there, it says premium mixes have a superior water holding capacity and wettability. And if you saw that video, then you would have seen that when Adam poured the water on the potty mix, it soaked through the pot really, really nicely, very quickly. And what that does is the water obviously comes out the bottom of your pot, but it's also important that the mix still retains a whole heap of that moisture. If it doesn't do that, it won't retain a red tick. The other thing that you'll notice that you would see in the video is that when he poured water on another plant, it all just poured at the top. It had no wetting agent in it. It didn't allow the water to penetrate. No good. If you've got potting mix like that, you need to add wetting agent. So the difference between black and red tick is a huge, huge jump. And this is just some of the science in a red tick premium bag. So this isn't just Scott's Osmocote. There's other brands that do premium red ticks. And like I said, if you've learned anything from this, it's to look out for a red tick. That's what I want you to walk away with. But nitrogen drawdown. So that they test about how well the plant can uptake nitrogen minerals out of the potting mix. If a plant can't take up the food source, then it's no good. It's not going to grow or anything like that. So it needs to have to be able to draw down the nitrogen. You'll see air-filled porosity. So we add coconut coir into our mixes. It's a big component of our mix. In a 25-litre bag, there's about 5 litres of coir. And that coir, which is the coconut coir from Sri Lankan coconuts, that actually helps retain the moisture in the mix. So when the water runs through, the coir still holds the moisture and keeps your plant wet, and the roots, allows the roots to take up the moisture. It also is really important for the airfill because the roots need to be able to breathe. So if you've got compacted hard potty mix, your roots aren't going to get the oxygen and air that they need, and your plant will effectively suffocate and die. So air-filled porosity is a really important component of potty mix. It has to be air in it. The water holding capacity is what I've just spoke about then, how much water flows through but still actually retains in the mix. It needs to achieve a certain standard there. And then the wettability. So once the mix is dry, when you wet it again, does it just pool at the top and not go in, or does it soak through? So that's what, that 5 points. I think there's 24 criteria for a red tick. So there's a big jump in the standard. Strangely enough, there isn't a big jump in price. So you can get a black, a no tick product for say $3, $4. You get a black tick product for $5, $6, and you can get a red tick product for $8. So you're jumping up, $3, $2, but what you're getting in the bag is very, very important. And there's just some of the things that you'll find in red tick potty mixes. So you'll get some fertilizer in it. Obviously in Osmocote potty mix, there's Osmocote. So you get Osmocote that feeds for 4 to 6 months, depending on what type you get. Trace elements, which obviously all plants need a form of trace elements like magnesium, potassium, all those types of things to grow. In some mixtures, you'll have seaweed, sand, organic carbon, really important to have really healthy soil with a nice organic carbon. And then the bottom, you'll see the wetting agents, water crystals, obviously very important in keeping your mix able to retain water and re-release it. But again, there's a whole heap of things. That's just a few. So there is a lot of science goes into potty mix. It's not just a bag of dirt. So just a little bit about the Osmocote range. Obviously, that's what I do, so I can tell you a little bit more about that. So with the Osmocote range, depending on the brand, the premium one there at the front's got a 4-month feed. So when you buy that mix, you don't need to add anything into that for at least 4 months. You can plant straight into it. It's got fertilizers, it's got wetting agents, it's got all the growth stimulants and trace elements. You don't need to add anything. When you buy those cheap ones, like I said, that's when you need to add all those other extras to get it to the same type of mix. So you can see where the value is in spending $8 as opposed to $4. You're getting a whole heap of extra stuff. With our specialty mixes, so you can see a couple there, there's cacti and succulent and orchid. They actually feed for 6 months. So again, for gardeners like me who don't want to be out there all the time, adding and mixing mixtures and stuff to try and achieve a really good result, everything's in the bag with these. So that's why that red tick is so important to look out for. And just that's a quick snapshot. Sorry, it's a little bit blurry because I took a screenshot earlier. But that's like our range. So you can see there's a whole heap of mixtures. If you've got fruit and citrus there, you can see the bright green bag at the top. You know, a mix there for fruit and citrus, cacti, succulents, orchids, roses. So if you're doing rose, gardenias, and azaleas, they like very acidic soil. So therefore, the mix is tinkered to have that high acidity. Seed and cutting mix that you'll see in the middle row there on the left. Obviously, coming up to spring, we're doing a lot of planting with seeds and cuttings. That has a high level of horticultural sand, so sharp little pieces of sand that nick into the edges of the cuttings. The more nicks that you get in a cutting, the more flowering you'll get. So that's the seed and cutting mix. Some native mixes, and then down the bottom row there, you'll see all our 10-litre mixes. And the one that I'll probably point you to that if you're not aware of, if you're a bit like me and starting to go a bit crazy with indoor plants, and we've seen now with this COVID thing, everyone is really getting into the indoor plants, actually going crazy. I heard yesterday that the growers who grow indoor plants have actually sold already their spring stock. So they're a little bit nervous coming up to Christmas and that they're actually going to have plants that are going to be grown enough to sell. So the advice is buy them this year, because I think next year indoor plants especially will be a lot harder to come by, because the uptake has been so huge this year that the suppliers are really struggling to keep up with demand. But that indoor potty mix, the bottom right, it's a special mix. It's actually got no pine bark in it. So I was talking before about pine bark being the main mix. The indoor potty mix, the main component of it is the coconut coir. And in there you've got vermiculite and perlite, so it's a very, very light, fluffy mix. And the reason that it hasn't got pine bark is because inside, when you have indoor plants, quite often a problem that you'll have is a thing called fungus gnats. So if you're not familiar with fungus gnats, they're tiny little flies. You might have heard them called vinegar flies. You'll be inside and you'll see these little flies flying around. They drive you crazy. Where they've come from is the potting mix. And what they do is they get into the potting mix, literally into the bags. And the potting mix will start to, as the potting mix sits there long enough, it will grow a fungus on it, which actually is a good sign that the potting mix is very healthy. But as soon as that fungus grows, the fungus gnats get in there and they feed off it. So sometimes you can come home, you can crack open a bag of potting mix and plant your plant and not realise that there's little fungus gnats in there, and all of a sudden you've got little flies flying around. With that particular mix, the indoor mix, much less prone to fungus gnats because there's no pine bark. They still can get into coir, but it's very, very uncommon. So if you do lots of indoor plants, definitely have a look for that one, because that will save you a whole heap of pain with little flying flies all around your living room. So just a couple of key takeouts from the stuff I've told you today. Please, when you buy a potting mix, look for premium red tick. Whether it's Scott's, Osmocote, or Searles, or Yates, or any of the brands out there, look for red tick. If it doesn't have a red tick, don't bother. And you saw what Adam said. There's nothing more frustrating for us as a company when we go into a Bunnings store and we see people with a trolley load of beautiful plants that are costing them a small fortune, and then they buy 10 bags of $3 potting mix. It's a little bit like buying the most expensive Dulux paint to do your house and then putting it on with a $2 paintbrush. It doesn't matter how good your paint is, the result will be terrible with a $2 brush. So same type of thing. If you're going to spend money on plants, spend money on your mix. Just another little tip, potting mixes shouldn't smell bad. So if you open up a bag of potting mix and it's got an offensive smell, don't use it. It's gone bad. Get rid of it, take it back. It should have a nice, earthy, organic smell. So if it does have an offensive, garbagey type of smell, definitely don't use it. You saw Adam say in the video, repot every 2 years. So, quite often mixes will slump, they'll get quite heavy, and we're talking before about the airfill around the roots. After 2 years, if you've got stuff in a big pot, it might be time for a change. And even if you have been, putting some stuff in it, some fertilizer things to keep it going, a repot every couple of years is great. And last but not least, with the garden, in the garden section of your local stores, you absolutely get what you pay for. So don't be tempted to get the cheap and nasty stuff, because there's usually a reason that it's cheap and nasty. So I encourage you all, no matter whether it be potting mix or fertilizers or anything like that, take the time when you're in the store to turn the bottle around and do some comparisons. Read what you're buying. How much nitrogen is in this? How much nitrogen is that? And the statistics on the side of the pack will really tell you a story, and you'll see the value. So you definitely get what you pay for with potty mix. Are there any questions? I've gone through that pretty quick, but I had half an hour, so I think I've done pretty well. But if you've got any questions about potty mix or if you know any of our products, feel free to yell out, and I'm happy to answer them for you.
I've got a question, Luke.
Shoot.
If I've already got soil in pots with plants in them, I feel like I need to start again because I don't think they're thriving. I think I've got the wrong potting mix in there, except for the one you gave me. Can I do that? Can I take out young seedlings? What do I do with that? What do I do with all the dirt? Do I just what do I do?
Yeah, so if you've got old dirt, you can put it in your greenway bin. So if you've got a greenway bin, you can just chuck it in there.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, if you've got a poor mix in there, then obviously your plants will fail to thrive. Simple as that. There's nothing good in there. So if you've used that base mix, it's just pine bark. So it gets the bare minimums out of that to try and grow. One bit of advice I would give you is that if you've got seedlings and things and you're going to transplant them while they're still young and sort of reasonably fragile, look at using a sea soil product. So when I say sea soil, I'm talking about the actual sea soil, not power feed. And so there's me plugging one of my competitors, but sea soil is a seaweed base. And what it does is, and here's one for you that I'm sure some of you don't know, but seaweed is not a fertilizer. Sea soil is not a fertilizer. It doesn't feed your plant. And a lot of people buy sea soil thinking they're feeding, but they're not. What it actually does, it's a little bit like a Barocca. So it's sort of a bit of a vitamin pill for your plant. And what it does is it actually stops your plants from going into shock. So the seaweed base is really good for that. So if you are transplanting into some new potting mix, some sea soil is really handy because that will help the plant, avoid going into shock. But then let it, give it a week or so to establish. And if you do feel the need to give it a feed, you can. But again, if you're using a quality potting mix, it's really got everything it needs in there for the first few months anyway. So you don't need to add a whole heap of stuff. And I'll tell you a funny story. When I first started with the company, because I had access to all these products, I thought, yes, I'm going to try this, and this. And I got a lemon tree, and I put it in a big pot, and I put it in our fruit and citrus mix, and it was beautiful. And then I got a little bit creative, and I thought, I'm going to put some Osmocote feed on it. I'll put some Miracle Grow. I'll put some of this, and I put about 47 different fertilizers on there to make it grow. But obviously, it did quite the opposite. It actually started to go yellow. The leaves were curling up. And I rang up our horticulturalist to work, and I said, what's happening here? And he said, well, what are you feeding it with? And I said, well, I'm feeding it with this. He said, no. I said, if you test your pH now, look what's happened. And I did. I tested the pH, and because I'd fed it so much, the pH was out, through the roof. So all I needed to do was take it out, throw that soil out, repot it, and I put it in some brand new mix, didn't touch it, and it thrived again. So if you're using a quality potting mix, stick it straight in there, give it a feed with some sea soil, and then after a few months, start with your feeding.
Awesome.
Cool.
I've got a question, if you don't mind.
Yep.
So if you've bought a bag of potting mix, you've used it for your plant that you're planting, and then you've just left it in the shed.
Yeah.
Does anything happen? Like, does anything die in the potting mix if it's just left and dries out? And
yeah, no, good question. So obviously we have a claim on the bag that there's fertilizer in there for 4 or 6 months. Okay. So for us to make a claim like that, we need to be sure that by the time it's sat in our warehouse and then it's gone to the distributor and it's sat in a bundling shelf for a month, and then the fertilizers aren't run out. So we use a 12 to 18 month graded fertilizer in it. But in saying that, if it's open and exposed and the moisture can get into it, it can get hot, the fertilizer is activating like crazy. So a little bit of background, Osmocote Prills, I've got some here. Here's some I prepared earlier. So this is the traditional Osmocote, if you can see that on the screen. And you'll see in here a little ball Prills. Okay, so this is just the Osmocote Prills that you'll find in your potting mix. These are hard little balls at the moment, but what they do is they actually absorb the moisture from when you water, when it rains, humidity. what it does is it then absorbs the moisture. Those little balls turn basically into little balls of liquid. They break, release the nutrients, and then the shell, which is a soil coating, just biodegrades. If you've got a half bag of potting mix, it's open to all those exposed. That's starting to break down. So really, if you've got potting mix, use it. Buy what you need. Use what you need. Certainly, if it's if it's been there a couple of weeks, no big deal. But anything over sort of like a month old, I would probably just get rid of. So keep it dry. If you do have full bags, keep them dry. Keep them out of the sun, and away you go.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yep.
So you mentioned something about the leaves turning yellow of
Yes.
your. So I have a kumquat.
Mm-hmm.
I planted it on straight on the soil,
Mm-hmm.
but now the leaves are turning yellow. So I was like, I didn't touch it, so I put it on the soil and then left it, water it
It's in the ground.
every now and then. Yeah, it's in the ground,
Right.
not in a pot. So it's in the ground, straight on the ground. But
Are
yeah,
you feeding it with anything?
no, it's just water, plain water.
So you might just find that the soil itself is just not very organically rich. So anytime you need to give your soil a boost, think of organics. There's some products out there. You'd be obviously familiar with the dynamic lifter. Is a common one that you hear.
What's that?
A dynamic lifter is a Yates product. That'll help your soil and help your soil enrich. And if you've got nice healthy soil, your plants will uptake nutrients better. So the trick is first look after your soil. So get something that's organic, that can give you some organic matter in your soil, and then secondly give it a feed. So in the products that we have a product called Osmocote Plus Organics, which is organic material to help feed the soil, and then the Osmocote to help feed the plant. In a perfect world, if you've got plants that are really struggling and yellowing off, the best way to do it is to feed them quickly with a liquid-based fertilizer, because they'll absorb much quicker and get the nutrients in much faster. And then add a granular fertilizer as well to give you the longevity feed. But anytime a plant's needing a kick, there's no point in like throwing granular stuff down, because it takes a while to break down. It needs a quick pep up. So if you've got yellowing leaves, I'd suggest you get something like a power feed or an Osmocote fruit and citrus liquid. Feed it with that, and then get something organic and help the soil. Usually, if it's yellowing off, it could be one of a couple of things. It could be pH, could be out, or it could just be a trace element, something missing out of the plant. It might not be getting enough magnesium or iron or something like that.
Okay. Awesome. Can I have one more question? If there's no one who's gonna ask.
Go for it.
Okay, so you've also spoke about the knots. They call it knots, because I have a lot of indoor plants, and I've used the premium potting mix. But yes, the knots, they're so annoying. How to get rid of them?
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways, and there's a few old wives' tales around gnats and stuff. Look, there's a couple of products that you can get now that are barriers. So you can get a product called Gnat Barrier, and it's literally like a sand. I think Yates do it. So there's a product called Yates Gnat Barrier, and you just sprinkle it around the top, and it actually stops the gnats from getting out. Effectively, it effectively suffocates them. I have heard that people, I don't know how good this is for your plant, obviously not great, but you can use a fly spray and very carefully spray the top of the soil. Once they die off, scrape the top off and have it. But most people that have a really bad fungus gnat problem will just repot. They're pretty nasty. Sometimes they can get quite deep in the soil, and just when you think you've got them, they come back again. So, but there is gnat barriers out there. You can certainly use those.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks for that, Luke. We will look forward in having you back in another meeting, right?
Sure. Look forward to it.
All right. Thank you for your time tonight, and we'll pass the time over to David. David, your turn.
Okie dokie. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
I must admit, I feel like a bit of a fraud coming in after Luke. I've just managed to catch some of what Luke's had to say, and he certainly understands an awful lot more of the technical side of some of the products and some things to do with the ground than I do. So never mind. I shall go along. Now, if I've got a little PowerPoint presentation which I've put together to try and, I guess, if anything, try and keep myself on track. I tend to waffle on, as those of you who know me would know well. Cindy, if it suits you and if it suits everyone else, I might do what my daughters have explained to me and click on the share screen and then go over and start a PowerPoint and start working our way through that. Would that suit everyone if I did that?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so just before I do that, a quick question. Do we want to have a break for 2 minutes so we can all run to a bathroom or get a drink or anything like that?
No, we're all good.
All good. Okie dokie. I've got my trusty sidekick sitting down beside me to make sure I do this properly. All right, so I'll share my screen here. And where are we? This one over here. Bear with me. I'm getting instructions on the side here. Now I'll need to minimize that one there. Okay, can you guys all still hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yes.
All right, I'm feeling like a bit of a fraud here, as I say, and I'm not very good with this PowerPoint either, so I'm just sounding like an old fluff at the moment. All righty, can you see a screen that says welcome?
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay, so I thought we'll go through the introductions. For those that haven't seen me on the camera, let's just pretend I look like this. I do. There was a fraud in front of the camera earlier, but that's what I actually look like. I've been married to Karen for about 21 years now. We are a family of 6, and we started our first veggie garden about 20 years ago. It went great guns. It was fantastic, and then we moved house. Since then, we've had many, many veggie gardens. We've started and stopped because they all became too much work. And that was until about 3 years ago when we started gardening in what I think of as a smart way. I don't like any extra work. I think we all work hard enough as it is. So I think if we're going to enjoy a garden, we should be able to do it without too much work. So I put together this little presentation. That's my 2 kids. That's our 2 youngest kids. So that's Bryce and Jesse. Just pulling some beetroot out after our first beetroot harvest. Alrighty, I've got a couple of pictures here of what I've referred to as a daily harvest, but look, to be honest, they're not. They're every 2, 3, possibly 4 days. And that's probably a good thing because you just simply couldn't consume this many veggies every day. We would pick out the amount of veggies that you're seeing there. We'd probably pull those out every 2, 3 or 4 days. And then Karen will nick down to the garden to get extra things that she needs as well along the way. There's a couple of pictures there showing you some of the things that we've pulled out of the garden. And once again, these are just coming in after we've gone out, done a pick, brought them in. And me being me, I like to chuck them on the bench and take a photograph of them. We've done okay as far as what our garden has been able to produce for us. All right, first question. Why do we have a veggie garden? Well, number one, I think like many people, we always wanted to. Number 2, you can save money by growing your own veggies. And I put in brackets there, if you do it properly. The reason I say that is I've seen many people try and criticise gardening with something which actually rings true for most of us. They say gardening is the method of spending $27 in order to grow $3.50 worth of tomatoes. And I think for many of us in the past, we've gone out and we've bought an awful lot of stuff and we really haven't utilised it to our benefit. And as a result, gardening can actually, if we're not sensible, can become expensive without the productivity. And from what I caught of what Luke was saying there earlier, if you can imagine if you're getting the right products, planting the right plants and doing it in the right manner and looking after them, you really can save a lot of money with the veggies that you're growing yourself. Another reason for having a veggie garden, homegrown food is just healthier. It certainly tastes a lot better. I think sometimes because it is more flavoursome, and other times I think we just assume it tastes better because we've come out of our own garden. But certainly it's definitely healthier. Another reason is the profits have counselled us to. We've been counselled to grow our own garden and produce our own food as much as we're able to in our own given circumstance. And the last one is that it's really, really good for your mind as well as your body. I have a rather interesting job, and sometimes after a frustrating day, there is nothing better than going out and just spending 5 or 10 minutes out in the garden. And then on a day off, if I go out there for an hour or two, it's just wonderful what it does for me. Alrighty, what do we do with all the veggies? Well, we started producing these veggies and we found that we were producing a lot more than what we needed to. So we started finding different ways to use them. So we use the veggies that we grow in soups, in stir fries, in salads, and often these things are eaten within 15 minutes of growing them. You can see from that picture there, we've got some silver beet, there's some celery, some kale, some bok choy, some spinach, and then Karen just grabbed a whole pile of it, threw it in the saucepan on the fry pan with some butter, a bit of salt and pepper, I think she may have put in there as well, and just heated that through. And I couldn't believe it because I'm the sort of person who likes to survive on chocolate, and yet this tasted absolutely delicious. It was fantastic. So that's one of the things we do with all the veggies. Another thing that we do with veggies is we give lots away. I went to the op shop, grabbed a whole lot of these cane baskets, bought them for next to nix, came home, gave them a good clean, and then we often fill them up with veggies and give them to neighbours and friends. We have some wonderful friends who have been very kind to us, and it's really, really nice to be able to do something back for them. Incidentally, I've taken veggies to work sometimes and given them to people at work and given them to people in our community. And surprisingly enough, last week I came home with 2 huge legs of venison or deer. Now, by the time you weigh that up in kilos, that's a lot of money's worth of meat that helps for a family of 6. We've had people come over and drop off lamb. I have 2 bags of spuds, huge big 25-kilo bags of spuds sitting on the doorstep, just from people who are grateful because we give lots of these veggies away. Alrighty, there's a few more pics of what we're doing. Okay, am I going too fast for anyone?
All good.
All good.
Okie dokie. I don't want to drag on forever, but I don't want to go too fast. Can I ask, please, if I do go too fast, can someone please yell out? And my wife, I think, is telling me to quieten down. Yes. My wife is just telling me I need to quieten down. There we go. I'm very grateful for my wife helping me. If I do tend to go too fast for anyone, please feel free to just yell out and I'll slow down or stop and we can address what I may have missed. So for my presentation tonight, for what I think was wanted from myself, I thought we'd set a couple of goals. The first goal is how to make a veggie garden that is simple. The second is to make sure it's affordable, because if it's not, most of us won't do it. And also to make sure that it's achievable. And lastly, that it doesn't take up too much time. I think if we don't look at a garden with those goals in mind, I think most of us can kiss goodbye the idea of keeping a garden going and getting something from it as we should. So that's the goals for tonight. All right. In order to achieve those goals, I think we need a plan for success and we need to understand a few things that are going to help us to achieve those goals. All right, so what I'd like to go over first is understanding some very, very basics. And I'm going to keep this really, really basic. So for those of you who understand this, please forgive me. I'm sure many of you already know the things that I'm going to talk about here in addressing some of the basics. Once we've done that, then we can look at where we went wrong. And one of the reasons we've gone wrong is because we knew a lot of these things, we'd heard a lot of these basic principles, but we weren't good at being able to apply those, because it's easy to forget the basic principles if you don't put them into practice, like any learning, I guess. Then I'd like to look at how we got it right, and then what to plant, why to plant it, and when to plant it, and then if we've got time, to have a quick look or a brief introduction at wicking beds, which is more than likely going to be another presentation for another night. Rightio, so that's the plan for success, I guess, from my perspective, if we want to understand how we can make things work work well, and do it for less cost and less time involvement. Okie dokie. All right, so understanding the basics. Incidentally, all of these pictures which I'm showing you, other than I think one picture of a rock that I got from the internet and one picture of some poultry manure, I think other than that, everything is out of our garden on here. So if we understand understanding the basics, one of the things we wanted to look at first was soil nutrition. The next was soil moisture, and for some reason it's clocked off the bottom. Also sunlight and temperature. Okay, so soil nutrition. I think this is the one which probably makes the most sense, but is probably thought of the least. And I guess that's why we're lucky that people like Luke and the company that he's working for have gone to a lot of effort to be able to produce products which will give our gardens the nutrients they need. Soil nutrition, I think, is one of those things we just take for granted. And as a result, I think it's the area in which most people fail when it comes to their veggie garden. Alrighty, that's just a cabbage that's growing in the garden.
Wow.
And there's some rocks. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay. All right. We've all heard analogies in the scriptures and everywhere else that we can't grow plants in rocky ground. I'd like to suggest that not only can't we grow plants in rocky ground, but more importantly, that you can't make a cabbage out of a rock. A cabbage needs stuff to grow, and the rock doesn't give it the stuff. And so this is where the soil nutrition comes from. We need to give the plant the stuff that it needs to grow. Alrighty, so if vegetables don't grow on rocky ground, why? Well, all vegetables, like all plants, are made from organic matter. And I can see I've got these things flying in all over the place, so please forgive me if this looks confusing. I've just confused myself. In order to grow the veggies, those veggies need access to the stuff that comes out from composted or broken down organic matter. Now, for example, the leaves that fall off your tree become organic matter. If you throw cardboard in there, it'll become organic matter. If we throw some horse poo in there, organic matter. All of these things that were once alive break down, and once they break down and become composted, they become organic matter that can be used in our gardens. So where do we get good composted organic matter? Well, one of the ways is you can get that good composted matter out of your compost pile, which 99% of us don't have. Or we can buy some cheap mushroom compost, or you can buy some commercial products which have been made to give you the balance that you need. For us, we've used the, I've got clicks going everywhere here. We have used cheap mushroom compost because it is already broken down, composted organic material, which works really, really well in our gardens. And to that, we've also added some poultry manure. Now, whether or not you add the poultry manure is a little bit more of a longer term thing we've found in our garden. And keeping in mind all of the things which I'm going to talk to you about tonight are based on our own experience in our own garden. And I think it's important to remember that next door's garden is going to be different to your garden, which is going to be different to the house on the other side. We all have different experiences and different understandings. For us, this has become an absolute fail-safe, easy way of doing things. So the soil nutrition we're going to talk about tonight is just cheap mushroom compost with some poultry manure thrown into the cheap mushroom compost and mixed about, and which we're going to plant into. Alrighty. Now, we talked about how we can't grow a cabbage on a rock. It's really important to remember that sand is just a whole pile of small rocks. I think that's really important. I remember hearing somebody say one time that dirt is what you get on your hands and soil is what you plant into. And the soil needs to have loads of organic matter. All right. The next thing we had after our soil nutrition was our soil moisture. It's really important that we remember that we should be watering plants by watering the soil. If we squirt the hose over the plants, it'll make the plants wet. It doesn't really do a lot for the plants, and on occasion it can actually harm some of the plants. However, if we get the water into the soil, then that water or moisture can be absorbed by the plants. So when you water the garden, water the soil. You can see in that picture there that what I've got is a really cheap soaker hose. It's a really cheap, nasty one I bought from Bunnings or some garden shop, and I've connected it to the hose, and that goes on for about 15 minutes a day. To do an experiment. And one of the things I did, I kept that going in a spot, as you can see there, and did not run the water hoses in the other spot. And I found that this position overtook the other position in its growth rates. I then swapped it around and tried to reverse it, and I managed to reverse it. So it becomes really obvious when you do that, that the watering of the garden makes a huge difference. Now, they only get about 10 to 15 minutes of this soaker hose a day. And importantly, when you buy these soaker hoses, the water squirts out all over the place, but it's only on one side of the hose. So all I've done is turn the hose downwards, so the water squirts straight into the soil. No water squirts up. That's how we water the soil, and that's how we manage to increase the growth rate of those plants incredibly with 10 minutes of watering a day. I guess another point to add here is this was in winter. Now, we all know that it rains in winter, and I don't think many of you would have the rainfall that we have up here. Our real estate agent told us when we were trying to buy a home up here that it rains for 9 months of the year and it drips off the trees for the other 3. And he wasn't far wrong. But we still find that the garden needs about 10 minutes of watering through one of these little soaker hoses each day if we want that very fast growth and production. Alrighty, the key message there being water the soil, not the plants. All right, the next thing we had of those 4 points in understanding the basics was sunlight. So what I'd like, if you can just have a look at the picture at the front there. The plants pictured in the front, and look at their size in comparison to the plants pictured in the middle, and then the plants pictured at the back. The reason that it's worth doing that is, surprisingly enough, because of where a big gum tree sits next door, the front part of that garden gets more sunlight than the back. Now, it's only about an hour to an hour and a half more, but it makes a difference. So when you're choosing a spot for your garden, if you have the option, choose the spot that has sunlight upon it for the most hours of the day. And if your choices are a spot that has sunlight for 3 hours a day and one that has sunlight for 6, definitely go the 6. Your plants, including your veggies, will grow a lot faster. Just check which part receives sun the longest, and if it's appropriate, that's a good spot to plant. That's just another close-up of the ones that are at the front there. There's some Cosberg lettuce and some cabbage there in the front. Alrighty, lastly, temperature. We need to make sure that we have the right plant for the right season. Now, we all love tomatoes, but there's no point growing your tomatoes in the middle of winter unless you're going to do them in a hothouse or somewhere with a little bit of added extra help. We need to make sure that we plant plants which suit the season. Rightio, so understanding the basics, we've done the soil nutrition, we've done the soil moisture, and again off the screen is the other two being the sunlight and the temperature. Before we move on from those basics onto the rest, is there any questions from anyone in regards to those first few things?
Yes, I have a question. We have a watering system that goes on every second day. So should Chris change that to water for 10 minutes? He's just turned it off because of frosts, and he just turns it back on those days. So we'd be better off to now start doing it for 10 minutes each day. You know, that's a really good question, and it brings up a really good point. Is it Valerie? Is that right? Yes, that's right. I remember you made me a house, a gingerbread house many years ago. I saw your face pop up before. I'm still getting used to this this Zoom meeting, so please forgive me there, Valerie. Look, it is a good question because everyone's soil is a little different and everyone's climate is a little different. And some gardens are more sheltered and some gardens are less sheltered. I would suggest
stick to the watering regime that you've got. Before you go changing anything, I'd suggest that just before the watering is due to go on next time, poke your finger in the soil near where the plants are. When you poke your finger in the soil, if it feels nice and moist, then your soil is managing to maintain the moisture content that the plants need. I think this is a really important thing. We need to keep things really simple. We can get caught up in too much, but really what we need is to have our plants having access to moisture. We don't want them to have too much or too little. I find that 10 minutes a day works an absolute treat for us. And I think for most people, it's probably an advantage to do that. But if you poke your finger in the soil and you find out there's plenty of moisture just before the sprinkler system is due to come on again, then I think you're probably doing it fine for your area in your garden, if that makes sense.
Yep, no problems. We've only just put it in April, so.
Right. Okay. All right, any questions before we move along then?
I have
No?
a question.
Sure.
What if the place where it's most appropriate to have a garden doesn't really have like enough sunlight? It does. Maybe it will have only like 3 hours or something, and you can't put it anywhere else.
Okay.
What would you suggest?
I would suggest that if you can't put it anywhere else, then having a garden there is okay, but you would need to plant plants which still thrive well with little sunlight. A classic example, sorry, my wife's just passing me a message, bear with me. My wife's laughing, saying, just remember we've grown them in the front yard before. When we lived in Narre Warren, I had access to a lot of seedlings. And so rather than keep putting plants in the ground, I actually used to grow lettuce and veggies in the front yard. We had capsicums and silver beet and all sorts growing in the front yard. So certainly that's another option there. It doesn't just have to be the backyard. If your spot that you can grow only gets sunlight for 3 hours a day, I'd suggest you plant plants that can still do well with less sunlight and give it a go. It certainly doesn't hurt. The other option is to look at growing some plants in some containers, which you can move to the front of the home if you want to, or to another area in the home. And we'll look at that a little bit more later on if that's okay.
Yep.
All right. Okay to move along?
I have a question, David.
Sure.
Once you've planted your seeds, you put in the compost and things like that, and your veggies are growing. What sort of, there's so many different things that you put into they encourage you to put into your soil, like blood and bone and all this other stuff. What's the best thing to feed into your soil as the vegetables are growing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We'll get onto that a lot more in a few minutes, if that's okay. But look, really what it boils down to is they need organic material to grow in and good composted organic material to grow in. The reason we use mushroom compost is because I can get a really full trailer load for $40. And I think you can see how well it grows in there by looking at the screen. The other option, if you're not going to do that, is to buy, as Luke suggested, a really good quality potting mix if you're going to be going that way. When it comes to other things that you can put in your soil, I'd suggest, as I think I heard Luke saying earlier, he had some troubles because he put so many things into the soil to try and improve it. What it boils down to is if the soil has good organic matter in it, it probably has 95% of what your plants need. It's easy to go sprinkling some blood and bone in there as well if you want to, but the blood and bone is more of a long-term thing. And I'm going to show you an easy way to get around that and not have to worry about some of those things if you wish to. But that's in the next little bit, get moving forward if that's okay.
Okay. Thank you. Are we going to be covering compost, making compost and stuff like that as well?
We can another time. Well, I think we'll really struggle to get through all that tonight. Hence why when I'm referring to compost here, I'm just referring to using mushroom compost. But there's lots more that we can go through and try and fit into perhaps another presentation on another night. Unless we finish early, of course, I'm happy to keep going. But Cindy, knowing how much I talk, I think Cindy's probably going to tell me to stop at the end. I'll talk your ears off.
It's all good.
All righty. So let's move along. Let's have a look at where we went wrong. Hopefully you can see that picture on your screen. A couple of things that we did that went wrong. Number one, we did not suppress the weeds. Now, I don't want to spray poisons on the ground. I have no problems with people who do. If you want to spray the poisons, you go for your life. I don't want to go spraying the poisons. So one of the challenges we had is we didn't get rid of the weeds. And I'm going to show you a way to get rid of weeds in a minute that I think is a really good option. That's the first place we went wrong. The second place we went wrong is in our garden. We didn't realise that in our garden, all of the soil in there was actually landfill that had been scraped off another area. It was clay, it was almost barren, and it was useless. And we spent a small fortune trying to pour stuff in there in order to make that soil good. It didn't work. What it did do, it managed to help us to lose a bit of money that summer, to lose a bit of money through the winter, to lose a bit more money through the spring, to lose a bit more money through the next summer, and then to say, oh, to heck with this, we can't be bothered, it's not worth it. The weeds keep coming back in the poor quality soil, and every year I need to keep improving the soil. So as a result, we no longer try and improve that soil. We no longer try and spend truckloads of money pouring things into the soil to try and fix it. Okay, how we got it right. So this is what our garden's like now, and most of the garden grows like this. And the reason I say I think we got it right is because we get a lot of produce out of our garden. We probably have, my wife's sitting over there and she's probably going to laugh at me at my expense. What would we get, Karen? About 5 to 10 times more than we can eat?
Every time you go and get it.
Karen has just told me that every time I go and pick from the garden for dinner, I bring in far too much. And we're also sending veggies out to friends and families, which I've got to admit I love. Okay, so what is it that's made this work for us? Okie dokie. We followed the no-dig method. That's the first thing. And I like the sound of that because it meant that we didn't have as much work. Okay, so the first thing we did is we tried to choose a sunny position where we were able to, keeping in mind that that's not always possible. We chose a sunny position where we were able to. The second thing we did is we blocked out the weeds. And hopefully you can see there, I haven't suggested we've killed the weeds. I've said we've blocked them out. So this system, which I'm going to show you this evening, you can actually plant a vegetable garden right on top of your lawn and you don't need to dig it. You don't need to spray the weeds. You don't need to do all that. If you want to, you're welcome to. And certainly the more weeds you rip out with your hands, the better. But we didn't bother. We just blocked out the weeds, and I'm going to show you how we did that shortly. The next thing we did is we provided new composted organic matter. Keeping in mind, if I threw all the leaves that fell off the tree into the ground, I will have thrown in organic matter, and organic matter is good. The problem is those leaves will not have broken down and become composted. And it's important that when we put organic matter into or onto the ground, that organic matter has already broken down, that it's been composted. Now, it will continue to break down over time, but it needs to have broken down to a certain extent in order for us to use that and to provide benefit for the veggies. The next thing we did is add moisture to the soil. So we picked a sunny spot, blocked out the weeds, put some new organic matter on there, some composted organic matter. We used mushroom compost, and then we added moisture to the soil. Alrighty. So you can see I've got can we all see the veggie garden? Is that all coming up on the screen there?
Yeah.
Great. So I wanted to extend that, and you can see over there where I wanted to extend it, where the cardboard is. So we chose that spot. It's not the sunniest of spots, but I wanted to plant more veggies because I'm a nutcase and I'm planting too many, and that was an opportunity to plant more. So I thought, well, let's go berserk. We'll get rid of all of the weeds and the plants that were over there and plant veggies. And even if I plant them and give them away, that's better than having weeds over there. So once we chose that spot, the next thing we had to do was block out the weeds. And we did that by putting layers of cardboard down. Now, when you put the cardboard down, you need to put at least 2 layers of cardboard down. If you decide to get all excited and put down 6 layers of cardboard, you need to know that will work well. It will work even better. But you need to put down at least 2 layers thick of cardboard. If you don't, your weeds are guaranteed to come through with a vengeance. All right. There's a bit of an echo. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. So there's another bit. Oh, my wife's telling me that it was the echo was coming from her phone. My apologies. Okay, so you can see there's just another shot of where we've stuck the cardboard on the ground. Next one, I gave the cardboard a bit of a squirt with water. You need to know you don't need to squirt it with water. The reason I did that is the cardboard kept springing back up and annoying me. It wouldn't stay flat where I wanted it. So I squirted it, it stayed flat. There's nothing technical about this. I literally just laid the cardboard down on the spot and then laid another layer over the top of that. And it's important to make sure that you overlap it in a way so that there's not a gap that leads straight through to the bottom. This is where it gets no more technical, and it's actually a bit of a giggle as to how easy this is. Okay, so we put the cardboard down to smother any weeds that are there. All right, the next is we provide the composted organic matter. In this case, some mushroom compost and a couple of handfuls of poultry manure. And all we used was a couple of handfuls of those pellets over this whole garden area. Righty, so there's my little one there. You can see the bag of gypsum in the background. That's what we had been spraying on the ground, sprinkling on the ground to try and fix the clay. And it got to the point where it's just a waste of time. So we put the cardboard down and we started spreading mushroom compost over the top. You can see here, I don't know if the mouse is going to show up. No, it's not. You can see there that there's a garden, like a garden bed wall or a sleeper there. It probably doesn't show up very well, but that's on quite a significant slope. Now, you don't need to put in retaining walls. It's absolutely not necessary. But I had a spare sleeper or two there, and I had some of those cheap star pickets. I banged them in the ground, put a stick in them, and then we kept filling the mushroom compost over the top of that again. Now, it's important to note that you should put a good 6 to 8 inches of mushroom compost on. This will help block out the light and stop the weeds from being able to come through. Now, if you're planning on doing this over a prolonged period of time, even better is to spread the mushroom compost on the ground, to put a tarpaulin over the top, a cheap piece of plastic or a cheap tarpaulin, put some bricks on it so it doesn't blow away, and come back in 3 months, you won't have any weeds coming through. And if you do it that way, you can actually get away with as little as about 4 inches of mushroom compost. I'm impatient. I didn't want to wait. I haven't waited for any of the other part. And as a result, we put 6 to 8 inches of mushroom compost down, and it works a treat. Alrighty, so you can see there, Jessie has started to fill it up. There's the finished result. I must apologise. I've just taken some quick snapshots with the phone, so they're not very good quality, the photographs there, sorry. Rightio, the next one is to water the soil regularly. So I've just shown you another picture of where I've laid that little sprinkler hose there, and you can probably see already that that soil there is quite moist. You can also see that it's not sandy soil, it's not hard clay. It looks like fairly rich soil, and that's because we've put that composted material in. Now, rather than buy a mixture of dirt and compost, I figured I already had dirt in there. It was free, it wasn't doing any good for me. So we just put the composted material in there, like I had learned to do from a very experienced older gardener, and it has worked incredibly for us. All right, after we've put this is just from a different angle, the same spot, you can see we've put a little bit of pea straw down there just to cover up the ground there and to cover up the hose. Alrighty. Now, a lot of people obviously don't have a spot in the back garden and don't want to dig up the front garden, so need to look at potentially growing veggies in containers. The other thing is, a good friend of mine doesn't have any land. He lives in an apartment, he has a big balcony, but he doesn't have any ground. So to give you an idea of the cost of this little project here, excuse me, the cost of this project and the time of this project you're looking at now, I thought was really interesting. The foam box came from the supermarket just up the road. They don't like them. They have to pay to get rid of them. And as a result, they're happy to give them away for free. In the top left-hand corner, in the small picture, you can see I've poked some holes in. I think I banged those in with a screwdriver. When you go to do that, my suggestion is don't tip it upside down and push it inwards like everyone usually does. Put it on the ground and poke down through towards the grass. There's less chance of breaking the bottom of the box. I think I put about 9 or 10 holes in there. They don't need to be overly well spread out. After I put the holes in the bottom, we threw in the mushroom compost. Now, to give you an idea, we worked out there's probably somewhere between 30 and 50 cents worth of mushroom compost in that box. We planted those seedlings, and in the picture on the right, you can see there's a green oak lettuce and a couple of pak choi plants, and leaves have already been harvested off those pak choi plants which are in there. And you can imagine if my friend Murray wanted to, he could plonk that onto his balcony, or someone could have that in the front yard if they wanted to as well. Alrighty.
Oh, nice.
So before we move on to what to plant, why to plant it, and when to plant it, do we have any questions relative to the stuff we've gone through so far? All right,
Good.
I shall keep moving. Go on, sorry, who was that?
All good.
All good, okay. So moving along, what to plant, why, and when. All right, firstly, remember there are 4 seasons. The amount of people that say, oh, I'm too late this year, so hopefully by next season I'll be ready to go. What they mean is you plant veggies in spring and summer, and it could not be further from the truth. We get much, much easier growth out of our vegetables in the winter. So when people say, I'll start next season, you need to remember, no, you probably won't. If you're going to start, just start. Winter's actually easier to grow veggies. And whilst they grow faster in summer, they're easier to grow in winter with less bugs, less harsh sun, and less drying out of the soil. Okie dokie. What to plant? This is a really important one, and this is something that I've learned the hard way. So hopefully you can learn from my mistakes. Many people say you should only plant what you're going to eat. And I'd suggest this is really, really wrong. The reason I'd suggest this is everyone got a bit of a fright when we had this COVID-19 coronavirus. And if they couldn't get the silver beet that they were normally after, I'll guarantee they would have bought the next best thing. When it comes to needing to eat something out of your garden, if you don't have the perfect plant, you will eat the next best thing. Not only that, but you'll find creative ways to use the plants which you have in your garden. If you're going to be idealistic and say, I'm going to start a veggie garden, but I only want to have the very best or the ideal plants, then I'd suggest it's like a pea plater that says, I only want to drive a Lamborghini. Sometimes we need to plant plants which are going to help us, not just be the perfect plants for our diet. Now, the reason I've put those plants up on the screen there is because silver beet is basically the white and green version of mixed chard, which is the colours one. It's mixed chard, looks much, much nicer in your garden, makes you feel like you're an incredibly good gardener, and it's so easy to grow, it'll almost grow like a weed. As a result, it's a wonderful thing to plant. You will find ways to use it. Pak choi in the picture on the right-hand side, which is the same as bok choy, it's another fantastic plant to plant because they grow incredibly well. All right, so what I've got here is something that says plant for success. Plant veggies which will boost your confidence. Now, if the plants that you're growing are not necessarily the things that you would grow, but they help you to feel better about having a veggie garden, it's worth it because your veggie garden skills grow, your veggie garden grows, your confidence grows, and you will find new meals to cook. Can anyone tell me what's in that plate of food on the right-hand side?
Tempura.
It is a tempura batter. Anyone know what's inside it?
Zucchini.
Yeah, fantastic. So there's zucchini inside it on the right-hand side. And I found out a little while later after we'd cooked this, I posted it on a particular veggie group I'm in, and somebody said, yeah, that's faux fish and chips. I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, think about it. It tastes a little bit like fish. And I'm just being told I'm talking too loud. Can you all hear me if I talk at this volume?
You're fine.
So my wonderful wife is helping me. So zucchini in that tempura batter was incredible. It absolutely tasted yummy. And surprisingly enough, the thing on the left-hand side is spring onions in the same batter. Now, I would never have thought to put those things in batter and put them on a plate. But I can tell you now, after we tried them the once, we had them again. They are really good. So if you plant plants that are easy to grow, it will boost your confidence and you will enjoy yummy meals. And of course, you can always give plenty away. All right, here's just a couple of pictures of some of the things that we've grown. That's one beetroot.
Wow.
There's a few beetroot there. That amount of beetroot that's bottled there, if I remember right, I think there's 24 of the standard size jars and 3 of the tall ones. That all came out of a section of the garden that was only 1 metre by 1 metre. And the reason they grew so well is because we didn't plant them into dirt. We planted them into composted organic material. In this case, mushroom compost. Alrighty, so plant for success first. Plant the plants which are going to grow easily, grow well, boost your confidence and make you feel good. This is also important. Instead of going out and saying, there's a nice bunch of silver beet, I'll cut that off. I want you to have a look at the picture there and have a look down at the base of the mixed chard. Can everyone see there how it looks like a couple of stalks have been cut off?
Yes.
Okay, so what we do is we go down to that bunch and I might cut 2 stalks off that. Then I'll move over to the next plant and cut 2 stalks off that, and so on and so on. And then I go back inside the house and Karen tells me off for bringing too much in. So usually Karen will use some and then I'll take some to the neighbours. By doing that, the plant continues to grow for anywhere from 3 to 6 months. Now that's a long time to get out of one silver beet or mixed chard plant. Last time I pulled pak choi out of the garden to replace it with a fresh crop, I think it had been in there for 5.5 months. And I'll see if I can go, this picture here, we have that garden bed out the back. And last Friday, I harvested just on 4 kilos of leaves from there, and then went out again on Tuesday and harvested more. They grow very, very quickly. But instead of cutting off the plant, you take off the outside leaf and the inside just keeps growing and growing and growing. Now I've gone back the wrong way there, sorry. So I would suggest that when you plant plants that are easy to grow, plants that look good, and plants that make you feel fantastic about your new veggie garden, because that's the thing which will keep you growing a veggie garden. That's another batch of silver beet and mixed chard coming on in another spot.
How do you know when your silver beet is ready to harvest?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I hope you don't laugh at me too much. We tend to overcomplicate a lot of things. I would suggest you know your silver beet's ready to harvest when your tummy tells you you're hungry.
Oh, right, okay, because I like silver beet.
Silver beet, you can grow it until it's really, really tall, or you can cut it off when it's really, really small. It's one of those plants that you can take off at any size. Now, this is important. Based on what we've just said there, I've got there silver beet that you can do that you take the stalks off. It doesn't really matter what size they are. It might be that you have to cut off 5 smaller stalks in order to achieve the same amount of volume that you would get out of 2 larger stalks. But if you look over on the left, I've got silver beet written there, and then mixed chard, which is the coloured version, and it's exactly the same. And then there's pak choi and bok choy, and they're exactly the same. You take off the leaves when you want the leaves.
Okay.
Beetroot is the only odd one out of those where you're obviously not taking the leaves off, although if you want to, you can cut the leaves off the beetroot plant and throw them in your salad and make yourself feel like you've got a fancy salad and you bought it from a fancy place. Instead of just having a couple of lettuce leaves, you throw some very small young beetroot leaves in there and all of a sudden you've got a fancy gourmet salad. So I would suggest that when we're planting, we plant things that are easy to grow, things that look great, and things that you don't have to cut off and think, oh no, what am I going to plant now? But rather plants that will keep giving for months and months. And once you start this, and once you've got plants that are giving you lots of veggies, you will become a nutcase like me and just want to clear more land and grow more veggies. It is absolutely addictive. Lettuce is another one. We have, I think there's 6 or 7 varieties of lettuce. I don't plant any lettuce unless they are a variety which I can harvest the outer leaves from and go back for more next week.
Great.
Alrighty. So there's a couple of things here. Firstly, that comes to the main part before I go on to wicking beds if anyone wants to. Just to mention here, I actually manage a Facebook gardening group with about 30,000 people in it. We got asked a lot about our wicking beds and other things we were doing in the garden. So rather than answer everyone's questions all the time in the Facebook groups I was in, we made this group called Our Little Garden. If anyone wants to, this is not a plug for it at all. I'm not fussed if you want to or not, but if you want to, there are some resources there as to things that we've done in our garden and ways we've gone about things. All right, so before I go on with any more, because I appreciate you've all been here for quite some time now, and I don't have a watch with me now. Can anyone tell me the time we're at?
7:06.
Lovely. Does anyone have any questions that I can try and answer?
Got another question, David.
Sure.
I put into my garden this year some wongbok.
Right.
And they started coming up quite nicely, and then all of a sudden something started eating away at them, and I couldn't figure out what it was because it wasn't touching the other vegetables in that plot. So I did cover them once I saw that happening with some mesh, but they're still getting eaten. What are they, and how can I prevent it from happening?
Okay, so
what would it be that's eating them?
Rightio. So forgive me if I understand correctly. You had some veggies planted, and you found that something was eating the veggies. Is that correct?
Yeah, and the leaves.
Rightio. One of my daughters went out and took some fantastic close-up pics of grasshoppers. We had a bunch of grasshoppers that were absolutely annihilating our plants. So there are a couple of things you can do. There are a couple of products you can get to spray on the plants, and I believe they are supposedly non-toxic. One of them is, I don't know if you pronounce it Dipel or Dipel, but it's spelt D-I-P-E-L. That's something that you can spray on, D-I-P-E-L, and it is quite highly regarded by a lot of gardeners for getting rid of the bugs. What I might do here, perhaps someone can help me out. Can you all still see my screen with my little PowerPoint in the middle?
Yes.
Fantastic. Yes. Alrighty. So what I'm going to do now, I'll go over to here, gardening photos, wicking beds. Are you seeing what I'm seeing, Karen? Oh, darn. Okie dokie. Look, well, I'll give that one a miss then. I was going to try and bring up a couple of photographs. One of the things we did, and you might have a bit of a giggle at me now, but I thought, you know what, we've got all these people that rave on about doing things naturally. So one of the things that we did is we decided to put a little pond in right next to the veggies. And the pond, I mean, you can do it out of anything. You don't need a fancy pond. Ours are certainly not fancy at all. But we just got a half a plastic container and made a pond, put some plants in there and hoped like crazy that we'd get some frogs. Well, we did. And as a result of the frogs in the pond, you wouldn't believe it, but the bugs decreased in the garden as well. So I'm not going to suggest that if you plant a pond that all your problems are over, but certainly we found that the parts of the garden that were closest to the pond had an incredibly lower number of bugs in them. The other option would be, as I said, the dipel or dipple. And we use a snail pellet to try and make sure that we don't have issues with snails. Now, of course, it only works to some extent, but we find it does work for us a lot better than if we don't use it. There are various different snail pellets around. The snail pellets that we use are a brown one, and they're an iron-based product. And I believe it's probably an iron chelate, but whichever it is, it's certainly an iron-based product, and it's not as toxic to animals if they eat it. Whilst it's not good for them, it's certainly not as toxic. So we use that to try and knock over the snails.
Can I ask a question, David?
Sure.
Dipel, is that available only is it an Australian product?
Do you know what? I have some out in the garage. I don't have a clue where it came from, but I do have some out in the garage. I'm going to assume that it's probably at most hardware and gardening stores.
Okay, I'm in New Zealand and I'm not sure if I'll be able to get that product, but that's why I'm asking.
Well, do you know what? My wife is Googling it now for you. She's in the background telling you she's Googling it now. So she'll see what she can find for you.
David?
Yes.
I actually went to the garden because I have pak choys in my garden, and yeah, something's eating them, and I found that there are like little green worms. I don't know if you call it worms.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, that's what I found. And I was like, so I just crushed them, but I don't know. They keep on multiplying, so I don't know how to get rid of them.
Okay.
Sounds like the white cabbage.
I can help you out with that one. It sounded like someone was suggesting white cabbage moth.
Yeah.
I would suggest.
Is that what you call them?
No, that's the larvae or the caterpillar that comes from the white cabbage moth. And the white cabbage moth butterfly, as it's called, is an absolute pain in the neck because it will land on your plants. And what it will do, it'll land on your plants and lay a couple of eggs on this one and a couple of eggs on that one. And next thing you know, all your veggies are being eaten to death by the white cabbage moth butterflies larvae, which are those long green caterpillars. So there are a couple of different ways you can go about getting rid of that. My understanding is that this Dipel product will get rid of it. And I've got an answer for the other sister in a moment with relative to that. The Dipel product, I believe, will tackle that. There is a product which we sometimes use. We only really use it once or twice a year. And that's when we're trying to grow plants in the height of summer, which the cabbage moth butterfly loves. They normally fit into a family called brassicas. And that's things such as kale, cabbage, cauliflower, and broccoli. Now, they will target other things such as nasturtiums, bok choy, pak choy, etc., and wombok, but they certainly love the brassicas. The thing that we've used is a pyrethrum spray.
How do you spell that?
That's a good question, a really good question. I know the answer, but the answer is slightly tricky. So forgive me here, I'll try and explain why I'm saying that. Pyrethrum is spelt P-Y-R-E-T-H-R-U-M.
Okay.
Now, let me explain why I've done it that way. Pyrethrum is part of a family which contains pyrethrins. So pyrethrum is one of the pyrethrins. Now, when you go to the hardware store or your gardening store, you can buy a pyrethrin spray. My suggestion would be that pyrethrum works better. It seems, in my experience, which may be flawed, but it seems in my experience that the pyrethrum is more effective. It's a natural product instead of a synthetic. I believe it's farmed in South Africa and comes from the stalk of the flower, the chrysanthemum. And I believe that's the main reason for growing chrysanthemums in the world. So pyrethrum works really, really well. But if you can be bothered, when you go out in the garden and you see those little green worms, give them a squish.
You do.
Can I ask a question? Oh, it's too late now. Someone was having trouble signing in. But that's an hour ago. I didn't see the message. But you're recording it, so you'll be able to see that.
David,
I'm here.
Yeah. Sorry.
Oh,
David.
you're here. Oh, that's good. It did work.
Yeah, no, you put an extra 2 in the code or whatever.
Because I did it so many times. I did it so many times. So I'm sorry about that.
No, that's
okay. Can I just interrupt for a minute, David?
Sure.
Yeah. a fortnight ago, we had Ken Lay doing the gardening club.
Right.
This, and he was talking about the white cabbage moth. What he did was he hung butterflies, like he made just laminated a piece of paper that was cut out and coloured like a butterfly. He hung them around his well, the plants that you said butterflies like,
Yes.
or the moths like, and apparently they're very territorial, and the moths don't like butterflies.
Sure.
And that was keeping it, keeping a lot of them away. Not everything, but keeping a lot away from his plants. And he just hung. He had little cane sticks, and he hung them on that. Yeah,
I've actually heard that many times. They even sell them in the gardening stores. Obviously, they sell them for a cost, and it's cheaper to make your own.
Yeah.
We, in this group of 30,000 veggie gardeners, there are a couple of topics that are guaranteed to get people to argue. One of them is whether or not those fake butterflies work. I would suggest if they work for you, fantastic. If they don't, try something else.
Yeah.
We tried them. We couldn't get them to work, but I know a lot of people who are very passionate about putting them around their garden because they believe that they work very well. I guess the last thing to add there is one almost foolproof way of keeping out the white cabbage moth butterfly, and that is to stick some hoops over your garden and throw a net over. If you throw a net over with holes in the net that are small enough so that the cabbage moth butterfly is unable to get through, then you normally do really well and don't have to worry about the issue at all. It does mean, however, that when you want to get to your veggies, you have to throw the net back to be able to get in, and then do what you need to and pull the net back over.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Oh, now my wife has passed me something else here. Bear with me. I'll pull this up for you. I'm going to perhaps look silly here. Can you guys let me see if I can. Bear with me. Can you guys let me see? Can you see that for you guys in New Zealand?
Not really. Oh, hang on. Oh, okay.
Let me read out the website address for you. The website address looks like it's a very easy one. It is newfarm.com. So it's NUFARM.com. And if you look up newfarm.com, this is a Dipel DF New Farm New Zealand product.
Thank you, David.
You are very welcome. Any other questions? Well, if we don't have any other questions, what I might do, I might... Sorry, go on.
Sorry, I'm late, so you may have already... I'm just wondering where you as good a place as any other.
I didn't manage to be able to hear that clearly. Sorry. Is there anyone else that managed to hear the question? It sounded like it was quite broken. Sorry, Alice.
Oh, sorry.
No. Maybe type it up, Alice.
Okay, right, I'll do that.
So now I'm learning. You can type up a question, can you?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Oh, fantastic. My wife's telling me it'll pop up on the screen in a moment. When that does, Alice, we'll... all right. I'm going to call out to my wonderful wife and get her to show me how we get the messages on this.
Go on the chat.
All
Click
righty.
chat on the bottom.
Chat, did you say? Down the bottom?
Yeah.
Right. Whereabouts?
There's Alice's message. Where do you recommend buying seeds?
Good question. So I'm just seeing all the rightio. There we go. Where do you recommend buying the seeds? Rightio. Do you know what? I think what I might do, I might look up the two places that I have purchased seeds from. And there's also a third which is reputed to be very good. And what I might do is perhaps if I get the website addresses for those, and put them in as a comment on Cindy's post. Would that help if I put them in as a link? I've only learned where to buy seeds from this big group. As I say, there's 30,000 members in there, and all they do is grow veggies. So they're the people to ask. These people that have been growing veggies for 40 years, they're the ones I like asking. So I'll check those, get the website addresses, and if you like, I'll list those up under Cindy's post, Alice. Fantastic. All right. What I might do if, while we're waiting for more questions, or if we don't have any other questions, I might just bring up a couple of other pictures, if I may. Firstly, I think this is really important. Veggie gardening for most people, it's just too hard because they think they have to build a garden. They think once they build the garden, they've got to get all sorts of stuff to put in the garden. I just wouldn't mind. Can you guys all see the screen again?
Yep.
Great. So if you just keep in mind that all I did was throw a minimum of 2 layers of cardboard down. Then we shoveled mushroom compost on top of it. And that was it. The poultry manure that we put in there doesn't even need to go in there. It just makes it last a little bit longer. But all we did was put down cardboard, mushroom compost, and plant. That's it. Now, if you go out to the middle of your lawn and in the very middle of your backyard, and I'm not suggesting that you do it out there, but if you chose a spot, put down some cardboard, put down some mushroom compost, poke your finger in there and put a seedling in there and give it a little firm down in the water, that's all there is to it. And people love to produce some fancy gardens. And we've certainly got fancier spots, and I'll show you a couple in a moment. But it's important to remember that this does not need to be technical at all. It works really, really well. Bear with me one moment.
Can I ask a question, David?
Yes, go on.
You talked about pea straw earlier, and it looks like you've got some pea straw on where you've, in that photo where you've planted the plants.
Yes.
Is that important after you've planted to put that on top?
Good question. In the summertime, you can water your plants, and if it's a hot day, the top 1 inch of the soil will have lost all the moisture within an hour. And if you have the pea straw on there, it helps to insulate the soil, so it stops the sun from making the soil too hot. It also stops, therefore, a lot of the moisture in that top layer of soil from becoming too hot and simply evaporating, thus destroying all your work in watering. So in the summertime, having the pea straw on top is absolutely worthwhile. You can use sugarcane mulch, you can use pea straw, you can use whatever you like. I like pea straw. It breaks down faster and I can just fold it back into the soil.
And where do you get that from?
I'm going to sound silly here, but whoever sells it for the cheapest. I think almost every garden centre will have it. Most hardware stores will have it. And I hope I don't sound like a rebel here, but I do everything I can to not buy from Bunnings. Bunnings have some good stuff, but they put a lot of people out of business. So I'm keen to go to the garden stores. Every gardening store will have pea straw or sugarcane mulch. And in the summer, it's really important to put that on just to stop the water loss and stop the ground getting too hot and killing your plants.
So that's different from lucerne, is it?
It is, but lucerne does the same thing. You can throw lucerne down instead if you want. Lucerne just costs a lot more money. The other thing too with lucerne, a lot of the lucerne chaff that you throw down may end up having seeds in it. If it has seeds in it, you will get lucerne growing. That's not something I want. I don't like anything that looks like a weed. I'm a little bit OCD. The only thing that I'll get out of the pea straw will be the occasional little pea plant growing, and you can literally pick them up, throw them to the chooks, throw them to the guinea pigs, throw them on the ground, and in a week they're not even there. Or if you want to get fancy, you can throw them into your bowl of salad. Now, I should have mentioned one other thing here. This system, which I've just to explain here, where you put the cardboard down, the mushroom compost, and then you plant into it, it's called a no-dig system. Most importantly, when you harvest those plants, and let's pretend we've got to the end of the life of the plant and we've dug the plant up, don't dig the soil over. Don't turn it over. Don't try and do anything fancy to it. Leave it alone. There will be all sorts of microbial activity going on in the soil, and that is good for the soil. Now, I'm going to detour slightly here, and hopefully it will make sense. I live in a farming community, and they say dumb farmers grow cows, smart farmers grow grass. The cows just eat the grass and make the farmer rich. I hope you'll understand what I'm saying there. Just look after the grass and the cows will grow themselves. So when it comes to the soil here, you need to look after the soil and the veggies will grow themselves. So when you harvest your plants, don't mess around with the soil. Just leave it alone. Take your plants, once you've finished with that plant for the season, gently remove the plant without disturbing the soil. And here's the easy part. Put 3 inches of mushroom compost on top and plant again. Now, there is a chap in the UK who's been doing this for 40 years, and he has a market garden. He pulls the plants out when they're finally finished. He gently pulls them out to try not to disturb the soil. He puts 3 inches of mushroom compost on top, and the next day he plants into it. As soon as the plant starts having leaves, he removes the leaves. He sells the leaves as salad mix as well as other vegetables, and he keeps doing that for months at a time. When the plant's finally spent, he gently removes the plant from the mushroom compost. He tries not to disturb it, and he puts 3 inches of mushroom compost on top and plants again. And as I said, he's been doing this for 40 years. He actually runs an experiment where he digs one garden bed right beside the next garden bed that he refuses to dig. He plants the identical plants into both garden beds. And he said he gets a little bit more veggies out of his no-dig bed, but more importantly, the bed he digs over is the one he keeps getting the weeds in. He says, why spend hours trying to create a scenario that will grow weeds for you? Instead, just put down some more mushroom compost and plant again. So that's the no-dig method, which we have used here, and it has just been fabulous. You've seen the pictures that we've got of what we've managed to produce out of this. It has just been ridiculously easy, and I guess simply that's why our garden has continued to expand.
So you don't, when you put the new mushroom compost on top, you don't dig that into your existing one?
Correct.
Okay.
Cardboard, you just put 2 layers of cardboard. If you want to, you can put 5 layers of cardboard down. Just make sure you put at least 2 layers of thick cardboard down. If you're not sure if it's enough, just put some more cardboard down. It's free. You can get it from the supermarket. And if you're sitting there thinking, I wonder if this is enough, then my suggestion would be put another layer on and then put your mushroom compost on, and that's it. Don't dig it into the soil.
And what about, David, what about if you've only got pots? Because I used to have a big garden, now we've moved and I don't. And I've only got pots and garden bags. What do I do in there?
Okay, let me press play.
I know there's 20 now.
Rightio. Can you see that picture there?
Yeah.
Yep. So that's a foam box.
Yeah.
And there's about 50 cents worth of mushroom compost in there.
So just that, not cardboard on the bottom, not
Correct.
just the mushroom compost.
Correct. Now, the only reason for putting cardboard on the ground, the only reason for that is to suffocate the weeds. Now, in a foam box, you're not likely to have weeds coming up through there, especially if you move that box once every week or so. It'll stop the grass weeds from trying to work their way in. Now, I should add here, this works really, really, really well for me. I haven't heard most of what Luke mentioned earlier, but the guys who sell the really good quality potting mixes, they make good money out of it because their mixes are good. They're really good. I remember going and buying some of those $3 or $4 of bags of potting mix from Bunnings one time, and the bloke handed it to me and he said, there you go, bag of dirt, because I bought the cheap, nasty stuff. So what Luke's saying is right. You want something that's got the stuff in it that your plants need. Now, certainly, if I was going to be doing it in a foam box, because I've got a whole load of mushroom compost, personally, I'll use that. And I must admit, when I pull the plants out, I know exactly what I'll do. I'll put another 3 inches of mushroom compost on top and plant straight in. The other thing is, if you want to, you can dig some poultry manure in or anything else that you want to put in there as well.
Can I just ask a question? Do you rest your land? Well, because like, you know, overseas, like it goes through a season, like it's used and then it's rested and then like moved on. Like, because they say you should rest the land once every 7 years or something.
Absolutely. So what they're generally referring to there is more likely to be something called broadacre cropping. And that's where you are generally tilling the soil and planting into it. At the end, you harvest, you till the soil or turn it all over and plant into it again. With this method, I figured if this old gentleman has been doing it for 40 years, and in the new place he's in now, I think he's been there for, I think it's 11 years, and he doesn't rest anything. You would not believe the amount of food that he gets out of 1 acre of property. It's phenomenal, because at the end of every year, he replaces the top with another 3 inches of mushroom compost. So it's always getting a new layer of composted organic material, and he's not disturbing the soil below, if that makes sense.
Yep, thank you.
Interesting. What about fruit trees?
You can laugh at me here. Best to get someone who knows something about fruit trees.
All right.
I'm no good with fruit trees. We've got a few that are growing okay, but they're only growing okay because they happen to be good at it, not me.
Can I just ask, what about potatoes and sweet potatoes? Do you grow those in that sort of soil?
I take a bunch of veggies to a friend and I come home with about 50 kilos of potatoes because he's a spud grower. So you can imagine we haven't really been in a race to plant potatoes. My understanding, and it's very limited when it comes to potatoes, my understanding is that you don't need as much of this type of soil. It will certainly work very, very well. But my limited understanding of potatoes would be that if you were going to use something like mushroom compost, it's likely to work very well, but you would probably mix it with some chaff, some straw, some wood shavings, anything like that to make it a little bit lighter and fluffier again. And then generally what's done over here is people will, they'll use a stack of tyres or a drum or whatever it might be. They'll plant some soil in the bottom. They'll put the potatoes into that. And then as the plant grows up, they'll bury about 70% of the plant and only leave a little bit out of the top. And then as it grows more, they'll keep doing that. And eventually they just lift off the drum and the whole thing collapses and you've got a million spuds. So that's generally the way spuds are grown around here by the backyard gardener.
Is that from, are you saying that from the one plant when it shoots up and you've got the green growth on top?
Yes.
You just keep adding to it.
Correct. So if you can imagine, and I'm not suggesting you should grow your veggies in tyres, but a lot of people do and it works well. So just bear with me for a moment. Place a tyre on the ground, place some straw on the bottom, put some mushroom compost or some dirt on top of that, and stick your little seed spuds in there. Once you've done that, they'll start growing. When they start growing, let's pretend that the plant has come up 15 centimetres. Then you bury the bottom 10 centimetres and you only leave the top 5 centimetres out. And then that will grow up and you keep doing the same again and again and again. Next thing you know, you're having to keep putting tyres on because the pile of dirt keeps getting so high. And by the time you've got 6 or 7 tyres up, you say, do you know what? I can't wait anymore. I want to see how the potatoes are doing. So you take the top tyre off, then the next one, then the next one. And when you do, there's not a lot of dirt in there. Most of it is just layers and layers and layers of potatoes.
I'm going to give it a try, David. I've done the gardening along, like I've got a big garden and that's backbreaking, but this I like the sound of it.
This is really easy. What I might do, I might show you 3 slides. Cindy mentioned to me that one of our sisters had asked about our wicking beds. I'll just show you 3 slides here, and then perhaps, Cindy, you can gauge with the sisters at another time when it suits you, if it's worthwhile having a look at wicking beds a bit further. But just by way of an introduction, the wicking beds here, they look like a raised garden bed. They're not, but they look like it. So just forgive the fancy bit of timber around the outside. You'll see in a moment, I did that just so it looks good. It's absolutely not needed. I'm just going to plug the computer and it's about to die. Bear with me.
Cindy, thank you for the invite.
You're welcome.
Love it.
I see you like gardening, so I thought I'll let you know.
Oh, it's been
Righty,
very-
my apologies, guys. Can you see me there okay?
Yep.
I don't like this Zoom stuff like this. I'm looking at this and I can keep seeing my face and I don't like that. Where are we? No, my wife just said, try being a teacher. Okie dokie. So if you have a look at that picture there, that's growing in our wicking beds. Hopefully from this, what you can see there is the raised garden beds. Really all they are is a whole pile of bits of cypress pine. They're made to look like a raised garden bed, but they're not. In the top right-hand corner of the picture that I've got there, can someone tell me if you can see those white tubs?
Yes.
You can, okay. Those white tubs are something called an IBC, which stands for Intermediate Bulk Container. They're used all over the world, and basically you normally see those on the back of a truck. The truck drives along and there's usually a liquid sloshing around in the back of those on the truck. And they're all, people say this one's food grade and that one's not. The plastic is always food grade, that's an international standard, but sometimes they've had toxic chemicals in them and sometimes they've had food grade products in there. For example, it might be a sucrose or it may be a something for making baby food formulas, etc. So we obtain those, we cut them in half from left to right, and then we tip them up so that we have 2 half-size tubs, and we put all of those half-size tubs inside what looks like a raised garden bed. And really when it boils down to it, if you look at the raised garden bed towards the bottom that I hadn't finished staining, you can see some tubes coming out. In those tubes we stick the hose, and when we put the hose in there, the hose fills up a reservoir in the bottom of the wicking bed. Now the reason we do that is moisture works its way up to the soil, and even in the height of summer, we only water about once a month. So hopefully that'll give you a little bit of an idea of the wicking beds. And Cindy, after you've chatted to the sisters, if it suits and if you want me to, then we'll put together something relative to those. But really the idea of wicking beds is that the plants get moisture 24/7 and they get moisture all the time as they need it, and as a result they grow 2 to 3 times faster.
So what's underneath it, or how did you start it?
Rightio. Now
like
you'll see.
hydroponics.
No, it's not hydroponics at all. Alrighty. There we go. Now hopefully you can see why it's a thing for another night. In a nutshell.
I see you've got egg pipes along there.
Yep. Now the Aggie pipe, you can see those little black circles sitting on the inside of the tub at the bottom. Those black circles are not straight pipe. That's actually a coil of pipe. It goes round and round and round.
Okay.
On the right-hand side, you can see a green and black pipe which goes down. We stick water in the top of that green and black pipe. It goes down and it ends up in the Aggie pipe. The Aggie pipe goes round and round and round and round in a coil, and it leaks water into the bottom, and it also fills itself up. As a result, we can end up with a lot of water in the base of those tubs. There's a little bit of crushed rock on top of that, just to make a level platform for the sand. And then there's a fabric which goes over the top of that to stop the sand from falling through into the Aggie pipe. That's the only reason for that purple layer of fabric. Now the fabric's actually white, but I've put it on purple just to explain where the layer is. Then there's some sand that goes on top of that. You can see in the middle, the sand goes all the way down to the very bottom.
We're losing you.
You're losing me. Can you hear me now?
That's better. Yeah.
Okay. Right. So my wife tells me you could hear up to the purple layer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Rightio. So after you've put that layer of fabric, there's some sand. Most importantly, in the very bottom, in the very center, the sand goes all the way to the bottom. And then that sand acts like the wick in a kerosene lantern. And that sand sucks all of the water out of that reservoir that we made out of Aggie pipe. And it sucks that water straight up towards the next layer, which is the pink line. And it goes straight through that layer and into the dirt. Now that dirt isn't actually dirt, it's mushroom compost. And what happens is, just like a kerosene lantern, the wick which we light on a kerosene lantern, at the top where the flame is, there's no kerosene near there, but it has moisture, or the kerosene by way of moisture has been brought up the wick. And so the top of the wick is burning where there's moisture, but it's not burning down the bottom where the liquid is. So too in this, all the liquid or the water stays at the bottom, but the moisture is drawn up into the soil at the top. That's essentially a wicking bed. I'm going to suggest here that that's one of the most complex ways you can go about gardening. It's ridiculously rewarding, but if you're really just getting into gardening, you are better off putting down cardboard, mushroom compost, and plant. The reason I thought I'd put this on is because apparently someone asked Cindy if we could have a brief introduction to wicking beds. So that's essentially how they work. If that's something that people want to know more about, I've got step-by-step photos of how we made them. We now have 5, 10, 15, we now have 18 of those wicking beds, and it's just incredible how fast the plants grow. However, whilst that's the case, if I can take you back to here, I think it's worthwhile looking at this picture here. That's not a wicking bed. Just think cardboard, mushroom compost, plant. There is nothing complex about this. And I guess if we're thinking about building a veggie garden, can I suggest don't try and build anything fancy? If you want to build a fancy garden down the track, then go for your life. But in the meantime, just get one going. Throw down some cardboard, put some mushroom compost on top, and plant. And if you're not sure what to plant, ask the person at the garden centre, but do yourself a huge favour and plant some mixed chard, or the coloured silver beet. Sometimes it's called Swiss chard. It will go in the ground and you'll think, oh, this is not growing, it's doing nothing. And it'll sit there for 3 to 5 weeks and do nothing. And then it will go boom and fly out of the ground. Now, to give you an idea of how our garden goes and the climate we're in, we all know we had a cold day a few days ago. To give you an idea, up here where I live, it was minus 2.7. We don't live in a warm environment where we are, and our garden thrives. And if all we remember is cardboard, mushroom compost, and plant, and give it plenty of moisture, it'll knock your socks off how well it'll grow. It's quite incredible. Is there any more questions relative to that? I don't want to talk your ears off. I appreciate you ladies have all had a long night. I can talk about this till the cows come home, and I don't want to bore you to tears.
David, it's not necessary with the no-dig garden to have the cardboard and then pea straw, compost, pea straw, compost, pea straw. You just need the one layer of each. I've been told you have a couple of layers of pea straw and then compost, and pea straw and then compost.
Sure. I guess the easy way to answer that, where are we? If I go over to here, I guess the easy way to answer that is to say, if you get 15 gardeners in a room, you'll have 25 opinions. And they'll all think they're right. I'm just showing you what has worked incredibly well for us. And I've learned this from a little old man in England who's been doing this for 40 years and making a lot of money out of it. It's ridiculous how well it works. There are always other things you could do, but in answer to your question, yes, it is just one layer of cardboard. Now, keeping in mind that cardboard can be 4 or 5 layers of cardboard thick, but it is the one layer of cardboard, if that makes sense. So if you put down at least 2 layers thick of cardboard and your mushroom compost on top, and then plant. If you want to do anything fancier than that, the next step would be put down your cardboard, put down your mushroom compost, and throw some poultry manure pellets on top and fold those in with your hand. Now, given that this is the no dig method, if you wanted to do that, and putting in poultry manure pellets it's wonderful. It works even better. If you wanted to do that, you just need to remember that next time you go to do this, if you've pulled the plants up, pull them up, try not to disturb the soil. And once you've pulled them up, you put down 3 inches or 10 centimeters. Sorry, it's not even that. It's about 7 or 8 centimeters of mushroom compost for the next season. And you can throw some poultry manure pellets in that as well. And again, try not to disturb the soil underneath, because the microbial activity in the soil will be working for you. Just like the smart farmer who doesn't try and grow cows, he tries to grow grass and the cows grow themselves. What we're trying to do is feed the soil and the plants will grow themselves.
Awesome. So with the poultry manure, so you don't dig that into the soil, you just chuck it on top and then you plant?
Good question. So now I hope you'll forgive me because I'm new to this Zoom thing. Can you see my face at the moment?
Yes.
Yeah.
Darn it. If you can just remember that I look like the picture I showed you right at the start, if you just imagine that, we'll be doing well. So yes, when you first put down your mushroom compost, if you want to put down poultry manure pellets, just gently fold those into the mushroom compost.
Okay.
When it comes time to do it again at the next season, keeping in mind it might be 5 or 6 months later, you decide, I've had enough of the silver beet, I feel fantastic, I've grown enough to feed my whole neighbourhood, I'm going to try something else. Then you gently pull up the silver beet, trying not to disturb the soil. You put down 3 inches of mushroom compost, about 7 or 8 centimetres, on top without disturbing the soil underneath. And you sprinkle your poultry manure pellets on top and gently fold those into the soil, keeping in mind we're only playing with that top 3 inches of soil that we've just put down because we're trying not to disturb the soil below. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, thanks for that. Awesome. Any other questions?
I might throw one more thing in there if I may, Cindy.
Yep, go for it.
You guys might remember I was saying to your sisters earlier that when we're planting, we like to plant plants which keep producing, such as the silver beet, the mixed chard, the pak choy or bok choy, it's the same thing, and lettuce. We like these plants because we can take the leaves off on the outside. We take the big leaves off. In fact, even celery, you can cut the big leaves off or stalks off the outside. And then you come back in a week and the ones that were, say, perhaps a medium size in the middle are now on the outside and they're a lot larger. And so you can take those off. Now, it might be, depending on the weather, that only took 5 or 6 days. It might be that it took 3 weeks, depending on the weather and your climate, and provided that you have actually put down something like mushroom compost and not just planted into dirt. If you put down that compost, if you've planted these plants that you're going to keep taking the leaves off, you can probably understand that where the packet normally says plant every 50 centimetres, you can probably appreciate, I don't. I only plant them about every 20 centimetres and they all get overcrowded. And as soon as they get overcrowded, I rip the outside leaves off. And to give you an idea, we now pull so many leaves off the outside of our veggies that not only do I take them inside, I take them to our friends, I take them to our neighbours, but we have so many that I end up just throwing them to the kids' guinea pigs.
That's awesome.
That you've explained to me tonight, because we bought some silver beet at Bunnings, some little plants, but we were given some silver beet from our friends that were more established, and they had those red parts, and we thought, oh, they're very different. Now I can understand that's chard, is that right?
That's correct. And silver beet is just the white version of chard.
Yeah.
And when you buy mixed chard, what the growers have done, they've taken a handful of seed from yellow chard, a handful of seed from the red chard with the green leaf, a handful of seed from the red chard with the red leaf, and all the other colours. They've thrown them all in a bag, tossed them up and down, done the hokey pokey, and then planted them all. And they all come out in different colours. They are all different varieties of the same plant. They taste identical to each other, but the coloured ones make you feel like you're a much better gardener.
Okay, well, we've got some coloured ones and some ordinary ones. So I'm ranked beginner. My husband isn't, but I'm a ranked beginner. So sorry if I've asked some questions that are very obvious. But,
Can I suggest there for everyone that you remember that this garden, which you've just seen tonight, we only started 3 years ago. We have made every mistake. We've made all of the mistakes that you could have possibly made and more, I would imagine. So whatever you do, don't feel like this is beyond you. This is actually really, really achievable. And when you're asking questions and you're thinking, I'm a bit silly, I don't know this, it's really worthwhile remembering I was exactly the same. I was a bit silly and didn't know those things. And whilst I now know these things, I'm still silly and don't know the rest of the things relative to gardening. This is something that just goes on for decades. But if we put down the cardboard, put down a good 6 to 8 inches of mushroom compost, and when I say 8 inches, that's sort of 20 centimetres thick. If you put down at least 2 layers of cardboard and then put down your mushroom compost and plant, you'll be amazed as to how well these things grow. And all of a sudden, you feel really confident and you think to yourself, I am doing fantastic. And one of the reasons is most of us have spent time trying to improve our soils. We buy plants from a place where, for example, if you buy your plants from Bunnings, those plants have normally never even seen outside. They're all grown in a hothouse. And so as a result, you take them home, they die, and you think it's because you're a bad gardener. It's not. It's because the plant's never been out in the cold before. It's always had its mum to hold its hand. So sometimes the best place to get your seedlings is going to be from a garden centre or somewhere that's been keeping those plants outside. And in fact, if you've got anyone that sells plants locally in your area that grows their own little seedlings for a bit of income, often those plants are absolutely fantastic to buy. But keep in mind, you plant the plants that are going to grow well and make you feel good, because that's the thing which will help you to keep going with your garden.
Well, the ones Mark and John gave us, the red ones, are really growing really well, but they came out of their garden. So that's
fantastic.
Really... Thank you for that.
Can I just say, David, that you look very well, very healthy. Your skin's glowing. This is a good advertisement for a home garden.
Hey, can you all see me okay?
Yes.
That's a little bit frightening, but since you can see me okay.
And you haven't changed much either, David. You haven't changed much in the years since I saw you when I was in Narre Warren.
I'm still overweight and eating too much chocolate.
Well, your skin looks good. This is this means you're eating lots of other nutritious things.
I remember that somebody said to me, so long as I stay fat, it'll fill out the wrinkles. My wonderful wife just said to me, the reason I've got some healthy parts to me is because of her cooking and her good decisions. And I have to suggest that's 100% correct.
Got to balance it out with chocolate.
Yeah, chocolate is really good. A little bit of what you like is good.
Thank you. Does anyone have any other questions that I can answer?
Learned so much tonight.
It's been really good.
David, can I just ask a quick question?
Sure.
I'm just curious to know, hypothetically, if I can't get my hands on any of the compost, the mushroom compost, using the cardboard with my soil, will that still work the same or maybe not?
The reason for the cardboard is to squash any weeds that are under it and to try and suffocate the weeds. The mushroom compost that goes on the top, it's just there because it is composted organic material.
Yeah.
So you can put any form of compost on there, especially if it's compost that you've grown in your garden or a nice rich compost such as mushroom compost. But I would suggest you are highly likely to be able to get the mushroom compost from any of your garden centres.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You are very welcome.
I think there are premium compost mix and there are some normal without everything in it. I don't know. That's how I got mine. You get the premium one. Oh, okay. The premium one has got a soil mixture in it, plus the mushroom compost. That's what the garden centre said to me.
I would, look, again, I'm only basing this on my experience, but I would suggest that if you have the chance to buy a soil mixture with compost in it,
yeah,
or to just buy compost, my suggestion would be buy compost, because the soil mixture is likely to be compost plus dirt, keeping in mind that dirt's the stuff you get on your hands and soil's the stuff the plants grow in. They need the nutrition, but they don't need the little grains of sand. And I'm sure when Luke was talking to you before, he would have talked about the better quality potting mixes.
Yeah.
If you're going to buy some organic compost instead of using mushroom compost, it will be expensive, a lot more expensive than mushroom compost. But if you're buying a good quality compost mix, then it's likely to be just that, a good quality compost mix. Relative to the cost, for example, I put more compost in my trailer than I should have, and it's a big trailer, and it only cost me $40. And I had far more mushroom compost in there than I should. I normally put 1/4 metre in there, and that only costs me $20. And I'm sure when he puts it in there that there's at least 3/4 metre.
All right. All right. So if there's no other questions, we will finish. Anyone? All right. No one's got any questions. Thank you very much, David.
You are very welcome. Thank you for putting up with me waffling on for so long, sisters.
Oh, no, that's all right. So I will talk to you if we can have the other wicking bed gardening.
Sure, no problem.
So we will book that date in with you. And to everyone, thank you. And Donna, thank you for joining us. Can I please ask Val to say our closing prayer, please?
Cindy,
Yeah.
remember to stop your recording now before the prayer.
Sure. Where are we? Oops. Okay, here